Welcome to the latest Gramophone podcast. I'm Martin Cullingford, editor of Gramophone, and today I'm delighted to be joined by composer Edmund Finnis and pianist Clare Hammond to discuss a beautiful project, which I know is a very personal one for them both, an EP called Youth, newly released on Pentatone. Edmund, Clare, welcome. Now, you've described Youth as a set of brief pieces recalling an image, sensation of place, significant encounter, or a moment of vivid perception. So before we begin to explore some of those images, places or moments, let's go back to the beginning and how this project came about, and indeed how your collaboration as artists came about.
Well, Ed and I met 15 years ago now, which seems quite a mammoth amount of time, when we were both students doing our masters at the Guildhall School of Music and Drama. And we got on very well, and I think fairly early on we discussed writing a piece together, but we hadn't quite found the right opportunity at the time. I stayed at the Guildhall for some years. I don't know how long you were there.
I was there for ages. Yeah, because I did a master's and then a doctorate and a fellowship in between. So, yes, a while I was remembering the other day, actually, it was that when I was asked to curate a new music festival, and that's how we met, actually, is that you were playing in that festival some pieces by Alexander Goer. I think that was our first meeting through that,
And then after Guildhall, we went our separate ways, but we stayed in touch. And about 10 years after we met, we started to work on this piece, which I premiered in 2018 at Milton Court.
Now, artists meet a lot of artists, and yet here two artists have formed a musical bond and a piece has emerged from that. Describe how you know that this is an artist that you're going to be able to collaborate creatively on in ways that work for you both. How does that come about?
Well, for me, I could just tell straight away, listening and watching Clare play, that this was a pianist of real grace, lucidity, and of course, maybe it goes without saying, but the incredible technical facility, but also just a special kind of sensitivity as well, I find, in the playing. And something we were talking a bit about the other day is that with these pieces, I was not going for something virtuosic at all. There's an attempt really to sort of strip back and get to the essence of an idea, trying to say things in a kind of concise way, and it just made sense for me in a way I can't totally describe, that would be a fitting thing to do with Clare.
It was a good challenge for me in a way, because often composers, when they write for me, they write for what they perceive as my strengths, so which is sort of often very virtuosic, quite texturally dense, pyrotechnic music. And it was really lovely to have a piece that was so simple, where I had to really dig down and just be in the moment and just listen to the way the sound changes between notes, rather than generating too much myself, if that makes sense. I don't feel that I have to propel this music. I have to set it up and I have to engage with it constantly, but it's not a kind of propulsive energy that I have to summon up. So that's a completely different process from a lot of the repertoire that I do, and that's been a really fascinating kind of new exercise for me, really.
Now let's look a little bit more at the piece. So, Edmund, it's your first release of music for solo piano. Firstly, tell me about how you find writing for this intimate and arguably most direct of all compositional voices.
Well, I wrote these short pieces immediately after having written a piece for full orchestra, and I absolutely love switching between these two extremes of scale, and I try to, in my sort of planning of projects, keep that variety, and I'm fascinated by the sense of scale that you can play with music. So the orchestra piece felt like a kind of large canvas, and I was trying to make just a sort of one continuous, relatively longer span of music. And then these, on the other hand, these piano pieces, it felt like, okay, now I'm going to try something completely different, and where that might have felt more like a sort of large canvas, these are more like snapshots or sort of Polaroids, perhaps, each one being like, yes, as I've said, like an image just captured a moment, a memory or something like that. And I always use the piano when I'm composing. I find it, I've just always done that. It's been very helpful for me. And so I don't know why I really left it so long before writing solo pieces. I suppose it took me a while to get to this point where I felt, in some senses, sort of confident enough to do that thing, to strip back and to just let things exist in this kind of, in their simplest form, I suppose. So part of it perhaps was to do with, a kind of confidence in my intentions and just saying, yes, this is enough. This idea is how I want it to be. I'm not going to try and sort of dress it up with throwing lots of notes at it. I'm going to sort of mine down to what's needed, what's necessary for that image.
And the images you've depicted, and you've given them titles, but is it important, do you think, for the listener to know specifically what is being depicted, or is that more of a sort of guide for you? It's
not important. I like very much when a title can just conjure an image in someone's mind, but equally, if it has an element of mystery to it, that is also that can also be a kind of rich thing, I think. So some of them have titles which are kind of maybe sort of more universally understandable, like Bloom, Spin, Stream of Days, these ones, and then some of them are on the more specific, the names of visual artists, for instance, and in those cases they're visual artists who have in some way inspired me, not necessarily sort of directly, and I'm not trying to illustrate anything of their work, but sometimes in encounters with artworks in other mediums, I kind of get a sense of new possibilities of what I might do with sound, and sometimes it's something even more kind of simple and elemental than that. It's just a sort of joy in creating, and it's inspiring in that sense of, oh, this person has done something which I find really thrilling, or has a particular kind of beauty, and it just spurs you on to try and make something yourself. Clare and I were talking the other day, and I was saying that I can relate to what Morton Feldman said about having painter envy. I've definitely felt that in my life. The sort of the fact that people working in visual mediums, painting, sculpture, taking photographs, that you can just make something and immediately have an encounter with it, but that composing, is we're working with time in a different kind of way, and I tend to write slowly, and it takes a while to sort of let ideas percolate and really work out how it is I want to develop them.
Yeah, and the movement Hammer shows windows is sort of an interesting illustration of what you're saying, that actually they're obviously not depicting the painting, but something of that light, half light, the very full calm that's in there. It's the emotions that you're trying to say, this is what they meant to me, and through music, this is now what I'm feeling. Is that?
Yes, I'd say that's right. So these are paintings by a Danish late 19th century painter, and the ones that I was particularly drawn to are interiors, very detailed, the way that they're painted. The ones that I find most captivating are of just empty rooms with the sun coming in through the window. There's something very mysterious about them as well. They're not just the sort of, they have something perhaps even slightly kind of ominous, as well as this simpler beauty.
And Clare, something so personal must feel a very precious, fragile even entity to be taking on, adding something of yourself to, and then sharing. Talk to me about that.
Do you mean in the process of interpreting a piece that's been written for me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, also a piece where you've last time we were talking, it was about 18th century French music, absolutely fascinating. But there's a sort of layer that you then have to cross, as it were, to reach the composer. Here, you would have obviously spoken to Edmund, know what would inspire him and drive him to write, and yet it still is your performance, your interpretation.
I think the main difference for me when something is so personal is the afterlife of the piece. So in the preparation for a concert, I prepare it the same as I would any other work, whether that was something that existed before or a piece that was new that hadn't been written for me specifically. But it's the kind of meanings it takes on after a performance, when we were talking about in relation to the lullaby for Emmeline, how it marks an occasion, a very meaningful occasion in my life, in the life of our family, and that to have music associated with that is very special. And then youth for me now is associated with that kind of period of my life. I gave the premiere, I think, 3 months after Emmy was born, so it was and Lullaby was written just after that, so it's all sort of tied up with that. And then when I come back to the music after a period of not having played it maybe for a couple of years, it suddenly has all those meanings, and there's a joy in there that does become very personal.
And did you, as it were, receive the music and then set yourself aside to think about what it meant to you, or was there a continued discussion and dialogue in how this music should be interpreted?
I think with this piece, Ed presented me with the finished score pretty much. I had some idea of some motives and ideas beforehand, but I received the score and then worked on it. And I always send recordings of my practice at home on my terrible twangy piano in this little box to composers so they can comment if there's anything they would like me to do differently. I can't remember if there was much to change. Yeah. So. And then it's just a question, I do practice performances, I see how it works in real time, because that's always very different when you're playing a piece in real time with a live audience. That completely changes the rhetoric and the shape of it. It's a bit like putting, a ceramic pot in a kiln. Suddenly it looks quite similar, but the structure somehow changes completely when you play it to real people in real time. Yeah. And then the piece begins to live, I think, once you've given that first performance. Yes.
And an important strand of your work and career has been introducing people to music they don't otherwise know, and of course it's Premiere, it's because it embodies that. Have you had people with people subsequently? How have they received it in the way you expected?
Youth has received a very positive response. I think many people respond to it very very immediately on an emotional level, and in myriad different ways, which is lovely. I mean, music always means different things to different people, so it's fascinating to see how it chimes with their experience. It's also been very encouraging to have responses from other musicians. There's been a lot of people who wanted to, were interested in performing it, or who might use it for their students. So it's a sort of multifaceted piece, and it's taken on many lives.
Yes. And as you said earlier, that it's a piece with a lot of space and beauty, and you're sort of holding all of that together. Sometimes musicians often say that pieces of that nature they find even more challenging than something which is just very virtuosic. Did you feel that was something you're very conscious of here?
Very much, yeah. I mean, for me, I feel most comfortable on stage when I'm playing thousands of notes. I don't have time to think about anything else. I mean, yesterday I was playing in Canterbury and I performed a Mozart sonata for the first time in public since I was about 10. And in fact, I've done Mozart concertos as an adult, but I have not done a sonata, and that was very nerve-wracking for the same reason that youth is not, well, I wouldn't say nerve-wracking, but for the same reason that youth is challenging. It's because there's space between the notes. You've got time to think of other things. And you've got to be very focused, but not in a rigid way. It's more like a kind of entering a meditative state, so that you're there and you're present with the sound. You're not trying to force it anywhere. You just have to be with it. And, I'm quite a directed personality. I like to be doing things. So for me, that's sort of a challenge, but it's a wonderful thing to experiment with.
Yes. And when you do perform it, because it's about 17 minutes, something like that, what works within a concert setting alongside it? How do you frame it, as it were?
Oh, I don't know. When I did the premiere, I was playing it alongside Beethoven, but there was also a lot of contemporary music in the programme as well, I think. Was I playing in Sukchin alongside that, which is very different?
No, that was you played Stravinsky, actually.
The Stravinsky Petrushka Suite, which is completely completely different. So I think the contrast, and I always make sure that there's contrast within a programme. But I think youth could work alongside many things. One thing that really helps is having a piano that really sings and glows. There's a real glow. When you were discussing the Hammershoy, and I thought of the way the light is refracted by the glass, and just that beam. And in a way, the sound of the whole set has that very direct and glowing quality. And it really helps to have a wonderful piano and a wonderful acoustic, as with many things, but for that to really sing.
No, I can absolutely understand that. Where was it recorded?
We recorded it at the Academy.
Okay.
Yes, Royal Academy of Music. And I'm very glad that there is now this recording, because I think that in terms of the space that people encounter music now, that's completely open. We've done our bit with sort of getting the sound as we want it, but now I love that people could just have their own experience with it wherever. I'm very keen on trying to get my works recorded so that people can experience them as and when they want. And I'm very pleased to hear you say earlier on, Clare, about the sort of the fact that you associate it with a certain time in your life now, and so there are these kind of layers of memory with it. For me, there are the kind of memories of the things which have been sort of influential, which I wanted, with almost kind of like landmarks in my memory, and I wanted to just say, okay, this word or this painting or something that I might give that make that a title for a movement, and now you have your own that's sort of interacted with your own memory in a different stage of your life, and again with recording, that's a wonderful thing now. I think that I hope that it can sort of be in other people's lives in some kind of way.
And did you have any composers or cycles in mind when writing this? Not necessarily musical, thematically, or both, really?
Well, I think I have been drawn to pieces like Courtag's miniatures, the Yattercock pieces, and yes, I think perhaps even Debussy, the Children's Corner, and the sort of the shorter works by Schumann. There's that kind of sense of being able to say a lot with economy. It's something I've been very drawn to. And I think the piano does that very well, particularly. And I suppose that sense of just, it's one person, one instrument. We were talking about those paintings by Hammershøi, and the fact that they're interiors, somehow a sense of you're going into a sort of an interior mental state, perhaps. That those kinds of thoughts, I think, were going through my head. And for me, sitting at the piano has always been a way to think in a non-verbal way. And I've just, since I was very young, I was much more drawn to making things up at the piano rather than being a diligent piano student. Though I enjoyed that as well, but I would always sort of end up veering off in my practice sessions, and so yeah, the piano is a space for imagination in the same way that I suppose sort of an artist might have a sketchbook or something like that. It feels akin to that for me.
And you mentioned earlier, Clare, Lullaby for Emmeline, commissioned to celebrate the birth of your daughter, which comes at the end of the EP, but actually works beautifully as part of the whole, perhaps sort of reflections on youth and then this next stage in life. Was that something that just sort of happened when it came to bringing the programme together, or was there always a sort of feeling of intention about that?
Emmy is our second daughter, and when our first Rosa was born, Robert Saxton wrote a lullaby for her. She came to the Prestine Festival when she was very small, so she met a lot of composers very early on. And then when Emmy was born, I thought it would be lovely to have a lullaby for her as well, and I just worked with Ed, and I loved the language of youth. I thought that would be perfect for it, so I asked him to write this piece.
Yes.
Yeah.
What extraordinary thing as she grows up to know that it's there for her. Youth, the new EP by Edmund Finnis, performed by Clare Hammond, is available now on Pentatone. Edmund and Clare, thank you so much for joining me today.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for downloading this Gramophone podcast. If you've enjoyed it, we'd be hugely grateful if you could leave a rating or a review. Hit the subscribe button or simply tell your friends about our work. And if you want to explore classical music in even greater depth with Gramophone, then we produce a monthly magazine packed full of interviews, features and reviews. And all listeners to this podcast can get a 20% discount by visiting gramophone.co.uk/subscribe and entering podcast20 at the checkout. And do join us again for another Gramophone podcast next week.